My name is Camila. I was a fresh college graduate, my life brimming with possibilities and dreams, when a single phone call snuffed out my joy like a gust of wind extinguishing a candle. It was a call that brought the news of my parents' tragic death in a car accident. The two people who had been my pillars of strength, my guiding lights, were suddenly gone. The shock of it was like a punch to the gut. I was a grown woman, yes, but I was just starting to navigate the adult world. My parents had been my safety net, my guides. Their sudden absence left me feeling like a ship adrift in a stormy sea. My father, with his hearty laughter and endless wisdom, was my hero. He was a man of strength and kindness, always ready with a word of advice or a comforting hug. I remember our long walks in the park, our deep conversations about everything from philosophy to the latest football game. He was my rock, my safe harbor in the stormy sea of life. My mother, with her gentle nature and unwavering support, was my best friend. She was the one who held my hand during scary movies, who stayed up late helping me with school projects, who was always there with a comforting word and a warm hug. Her love was a constant, soothing presence in my life. Their absence left a gaping hole in my life, a void that seemed impossible to fill. The house felt too quiet, too empty without their laughter and love filling it. Every corner was a reminder of them, every object a memory. In the midst of my grief, a man named Richard appeared. He was a worker at a trading company who happened to be at the scene of the accident. He had provided a witness statement, and he felt compelled to reach out to me, to offer his support. "Camila," he said, his voice filled with sincerity, "I can't express how sorry I am for your loss. I saw what happened. It's not fair, and it's not right. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." His words, though simple, were a lifeline in the storm of my grief. Richard became a steady presence in my life, helping me navigate the legalities of the accident, the insurance claims, the mountain of paperwork that seemed to multiply every day. His support was invaluable, his kindness a balm for my aching heart. As the weeks turned into months, Richard and I grew closer. Our conversations grew longer, our silences more comfortable. One day, he took a deep breath, looked me in the eye, and said, "Camila, I've come to care about you a lot. More than I've cared about anyone else. Would you consider marrying me?" I was taken aback, but I looked into his eyes and saw the sincerity there. I thought about the comfort he had provided, the strength he had shown. And I said yes. I said yes to a new beginning, yes to a new chapter in my life. The wedding was a blur of joy and laughter, a day filled with hope and promise. After the celebrations, Richard and I moved into his house that was as grand as it was cold. The house was a testament to Richard's success, a symbol of the wealth he had amassed in his trading business. I was awestruck by its grandeur, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that crept over me each time I stepped into its marble halls. Soon after the move, I discovered I was pregnant. The news filled me with a sense of joy and anticipation. I dreamed of our child, of the life we would provide for him. Richard seemed pleased as well, but there was a hardness in his eyes that I couldn't quite understand. Our son, Max, was born on a clear winter morning. He was a beautiful baby, with Richard's dark hair and my bright blue eyes. Holding him in my arms, I felt a love so profound, so overwhelming, it took my breath away. Richard, too, seemed smitten with our son. But as the weeks turned into months, I noticed a change in him. One day, Richard came home late from work, his face set in a grim line. "Camila," he said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth, "we need to talk about our expenses." I was taken aback. "What about them?" I asked, feeling a knot of worry form in my stomach. He threw a stack of bills on the table, his expression stern. "They've gone up, Camila," he said, his voice cold. "Ever since Max was born, we're spending much more than we used to." I felt my heart sink. "But Richard," I said, We have a baby now. Babies need things. He shot me a hard look. That's not the point, Camila, he said. You're spending too much. On things we don't need. I was stunned. I'm spending on our son, Richard, I said, my voice rising in defense. On his needs. His face hardened. I'm the one who's earning, Camila, he said, his voice harsh. I'm the one who's supporting this family. You should be more grateful. His words hit me like a punch in the gut. I felt a mixture of anger and hurt well up inside me. I had thought Richard was my partner, my ally. But his words made it clear that he saw me as a liability, an additional expense that he had to bear. The days following our heated exchange were filled with tension. Richard became more stringent about our budget, scrutinizing every receipt, every purchase. He was relentless in his accusations of my alleged overspending, despite my best efforts to economize. Camila, he'd say, his voice dripping with condescension, you need to understand the value of money. Richard, we need food, I'd say. And Max needs diapers. We can't just stop buying them. He'd look at me, his eyes hard and cold. Then figure it out, Camila. Make do with less. I'd bite my tongue, holding back the retort that was on the tip of it. It wasn't that I didn't understand the value of money, it was that Richard seemed to value it more than he did his own family. Food shopping became a game of strategy. I'd scour the aisles for the cheapest products, calculate the cost per meal, per person. I'd choose the store brands over the name brands, the bruised apples over the pristine ones. I'd walk miles to the store and back, foregoing the cost of public transport to save a few dollars. Richard's decree extended to clothing as well. No new clothes, he'd said, his voice firm, unyielding. Make do with what you have. I looked at my worn-out wardrobe, the frayed edges of my dresses, the faded colors of my shirts. I felt a pang of sadness. I wasn't asking for designer clothes or expensive jewelry. Just something new, something that hadn't been worn to threads. One day, I saw a beautiful little jumper for Max in a store window. It was on sale, but even then, it was more than I could afford. I walked away, my heart heavy. When I got home, Richard was there. You were at the store, weren't you? Buying more stuff we don't need. I didn't buy anything, Richard, I said, my voice steady. I can't. You've made sure of that. He scoffed. Don't play the victim, Camila. You're the one who can't control her spending. I looked at him, my heart pounding. I'm trying to provide for our son, Richard. Can't you see that? He got up, his face red. I'm the one providing for this family, Camila. You're just spending my money. I felt a surge of anger. Your money? Richard, we're a family. It's our money. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Oh, Camila. You're so naive. I stood my ground, my hands clenched. No, Richard. I'm not naive. I'm just trying to do what's best for our son. He glared at me. And I'm trying to save us from bankruptcy. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? With that, he stormed out of the room, leaving me standing there, my heart aching. All the while, I noticed Richard's lifestyle remained unchanged. He still wore his designer suits, still splurged on expensive gadgets. He'd come home with a new phone, a new laptop, a new watch, while I was left to mend old clothes and ration our meals. Richard, I'd say, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice, how come you get to buy new things, but I can't? He'd look at me, a smug smile on his face. Because I earn the money, Camila. I get to decide how it's spent. His words stung, a slap in the face. I was his wife, the mother of his child, but he treated me like a burden, like an unwanted expense. His greed was clear, his arrogance palpable. He valued his gadgets more than he valued us. It was a Tuesday when Max came down with a fever. His little body was hot to the touch, his eyes were red from crying. I knew I had to get him medicine, and quick. I rummaged through the cupboards, my heart sinking when I saw them bare. We were out of money, out of options. I did the only thing I could. I took the last of our cash, the money I'd been saving for Richard's favorite steak, and bought medicine for Max. I knew Richard would be mad, knew he'd be furious. But Max was more important. He was my son, my baby. I couldn't let him suffer. When Richard came home that night, he was in a foul mood. He'd had a long day at work, he said, and all he wanted was a good meal. When he saw the empty table, his face turned red. "Camila," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "where's my dinner?" I swallowed hard. "Max was sick," I said. "I used the money to buy him medicine." Richard's eyes narrowed. "You what?" "I bought medicine for Max," I repeated, my voice steady despite the fear in my heart. Richard slammed his fist on the table. "You spent my money on medicine for that brat?" I flinched at his words. "Max is our son, Richard. He was sick." Richard scoffed. "He's always sick. Always needing something. Just like you." I felt a surge of anger. "We're your family, Richard. We're not freeloaders." Richard stood up, his face contorted with rage. "You're nothing but a burden, Camila. You and that kid. All you do is take, take, take." I stood my ground. "We're your responsibility, Richard. You can't just abandon us." Richard laughed, a harsh, cruel sound. "Watch me." And with that, he grabbed my arm, yanked me to the door. "Get out," he said, his voice cold. "Take your brat and get out." I looked at him, my heart pounding. "Richard, please. He's sick. We have nowhere to go." Richard's gaze was icy. "Not my problem." He shoved us out the door, slamming it shut behind us. 5 minutes later, he threw a bag of our clothes at my feet. I stood there, holding Max in my arms, the cold seeping into my bones. I looked at the house, our house, now a fortress we were barred from. That was the final straw. I knew then that I couldn't stay with Richard, couldn't subject Max to his cruelty. We deserved better, deserved a life free of his anger, his greed. So, I walked away, Max clutched in my arms, our future uncertain. But I knew one thing for sure. I would fight for us, fight for a better life. Richard had pushed us away, but he couldn't break us. We were stronger than he thought, stronger than he'd ever know. The city was vast and overwhelming, a concrete jungle where I knew no one. My son, Max, was just a toddler, too young to understand the dire situation we were in. With no money, no friends, and no home, I felt like a ship adrift in a stormy sea. That's when I remembered Grandma. My father's mother, a woman I had seen only once in my life, came to mind. Dad had a strained relationship with her and they had lost contact many years ago. I barely remembered her face, but I remembered the house she lived in, a large, old structure nestled in a quiet town far from the city's bustle. I had no choice but to take a leap of faith. With the last of my money, found in the pocket of my old jacket, I bought 2 intercity bus tickets. Max and I boarded the bus, our future uncertain but our resolve firm. The journey was long, and Max, feeling unwell, whimpered in my arms. I held him close, whispering soothing words, promising a better future. We arrived at Grandma's town as the sun was setting. The large, old house stood just as I remembered, a beacon of hope amidst our turmoil. Gathering my courage, I walked up to the door and knocked. The door creaked open, and there stood Grandma. She was older than I remembered, her face stern and her eyes sharp. She looked at me, a hint of confusion in her eyes. Yes? She asked, her voice firm. I swallowed my fear and introduced myself. Grandma, it's me, Camila. I'm your son's daughter. She squinted at me, studying my face. After a moment, recognition dawned on her. You have your father's eyes, she said, her voice softer. She opened the door wider, inviting us in. We stepped into the house, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold outside. I told Grandma everything about Richard, about Max's illness, about our eviction. I poured out my fears and worries, the burdens I had been carrying alone for so long. Grandma listened, her face hardening as I mentioned Richard. That scoundrel, she spat, her eyes flashing with anger. He'll get what he deserves. In that moment, I felt a surge of relief. Here was someone who believed in me, someone who was on my side. Grandma offered us a place to stay, a place to call home. We were no longer alone, we had Grandma. That night, as Max slept soundly in a warm bed and I sat by the fire with Grandma, I felt a glimmer of hope. The journey to Grandma's was fraught with uncertainty and fear, but it led us to a safe haven. It was our first step towards a new life, a life away from Richard's shadow. The attic was a dusty, forgotten place, filled with boxes upon boxes of old stuff. Grandma hadn't been up there in years, and it showed. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and mothballs, and the floor creaked under my weight. Be careful, Camila, Grandma called from the bottom of the stairs. It's been ages since anyone's been up there. I nodded, my eyes scanning the room. As a person trained as a restorer, I could see the potential in the discarded items. There were old furniture pieces, paintings, knickknacks, all covered in a thick layer of dust. It was like stepping into a time capsule, a glimpse into the past. With Grandma's permission, I started working on the items. I cleaned, repaired, and restored them, bringing them back to life. Each piece had a story to tell, a history to uncover. It was a labor of love, a way to keep my mind off the troubles of the past. Days turned into weeks, and before I knew it, the attic was transformed. The old, discarded items were now beautiful antiques, their value increased tenfold. I took some of them to a local antique store, hoping to make a small profit. The owner, a man named Mr. Peterson, was surprised by the quality of the items. These are fantastic, Camila, he said, his eyes wide. Where did you find them? In my grandma's attic, I replied, a smile playing on my lips. She had no idea what she was sitting on. Mr. Peterson laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. Well, she's a lucky woman to have a granddaughter like you. I blushed, thanking him for his kind words. He bought all the items, giving me a hefty sum of money. I was stunned. I had hoped for a small profit, but this was beyond my wildest dreams. When I returned home, Grandma was waiting for me. How did it go? She asked, her eyes hopeful. I showed her the money, her eyes widening in surprise. Oh my, Camila, she said, her voice shaky. I can't believe it. I shrugged, trying to hide my excitement. It's all thanks to you, Grandma. These are your treasures, after all. We celebrated that night, a small victory in our battle for a better life. The attic treasures were more than just old items. They were a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always a glimmer of hope. From then on, I continued to restore the items in the attic. Each piece brought us closer to our goal, each sale a step towards our new life. The attic treasures were our lifeline, our saving grace. And we were grateful for them, for the hope they brought us, for the future they promised. Richard, that good-for-nothing, hadn't bothered to check on us. Not even a call to ask about his son. I guess he was too busy with his new life, too busy to care about the family he left behind. But we weren't going to let him off the hook that easily. Grandma had a friend, a lawyer named Stan. He was a tough old bird, sharp as a tack, and he didn't take any nonsense. We'll get that bastard, he promised, his eyes hard. He won't get away with this. With Stan's help, we filed a claim for child support. Richard was furious when he found out. He called me, his voice a venomous hiss. "You'll regret this, Camila," he threatened. "You don't know what you're getting into." But I wasn't scared. Not anymore. "Bring it on, Richard," I shot back. "We'll see who regrets it in the end." The day of the court hearing arrived. Richard strutted in, all puffed up like a peacock, his lawyer by his side. He sneered at me, his eyes cold and hard. But I didn't flinch. I was ready for him. Stan presented our case, his voice steady and firm. He talked about Max, about how Richard had abandoned us, about how he hadn't paid a dime for his son's upkeep. The judge listened, his face impassive. Then it was Richard's turn. His lawyer was smooth, his words slick. He painted Richard as the victim, as a man wronged by his vindictive ex-wife. But we had a trump card. I played a recording of Richard's tirade the night he kicked us out. He didn't know about it, and I decided to surprise him. His threats, his cruel words, all for the court to hear. The room fell silent as his voice filled the air, his true nature exposed for all to see. Richard's face turned pale, his confident facade crumbling. The judge frowned, his eyes hard. "This court will not tolerate such behavior," he said, his voice stern. "Mr. Jackson, you will pay child support as required by law. You also have to pay for the emotional abuse of your ex-wife and son." Richard was stunned. He looked at me, his eyes full of disbelief. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The look on his face was victory enough. After the court hearing, Richard tried to worm his way back into our lives. He called me, his voice all sweet and smooth, like honey dripping from a spoon. "Camila," he said, "let's start over. For Max's sake." I laughed, a bitter, cynical laugh. "Start over? With you?" I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "No, Richard. We're done." I could hear the surprise in his voice. "But Camila," he stammered, "you need me. You can't survive without my money." That's where he was wrong. I had a job now, a good job. I was a restorer, working for a local antique store and a museum. I was making good money, enough to support Max and me. And with Grandma's help, we were doing just fine. "I don't need you, Richard," I said, my voice steady. "I've got a job. A good job. And Max and I are doing just fine." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Richard laughed, a harsh, bitter laugh. "You? Working? I don't believe it." "Well, you better start believing it," I shot back. "Because it's true. And guess what, Richard? I'm not just surviving. I'm thriving." There was more silence. Then Richard hung up, his parting words a venomous hiss. "You'll regret this, Camila. You'll see." But I wasn't scared. Not anymore. I had found my strength, my independence. And there was no going back. The next few months were a whirlwind. I was busy with work, with Max, with life. But I was happy. Truly, genuinely happy. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from Richard, free from fear, free from uncertainty. Grandma was proud of me. "You did good, kid," she said one day, her eyes twinkling. "You stood up for yourself. You took control of your life." I smiled, feeling a sense of pride. "Thanks, Grandma," I said. "I couldn't have done it without you." And that was the truth. Grandma had been my rock, my support. She had stood by me, had helped me find my strength. And for that, I was grateful. The sweet taste of victory was more than just a court win. It was a personal victory, a testament to my strength, my resilience. It was a reminder that I was more than just Richard's ex-wife. I was a survivor, a fighter, a mother, a restorer. And as I looked at Max, his eyes bright with laughter, his face full of joy, I knew I had made the right choice. I had chosen to fight, to stand up for myself, for my son. And I had won.